Now we are about to witness the most awaited session for the evening, that is in conversation with Dhurba Hazarika sir and Robin Ngangnom sir. So, may I call on stage?
Thank you. Yeah.
Good evening once again. Talking about the Northeast, so since our theme is celebrating writings in English from Northeast India and the Eastern Himalayas. Talking about the Northeast, so being from the Northeast myself, I know that the Northeast is a land of diverse cultures, folklore, myths and legends, as we've read and heard too. It has a heterogeneous identity, I feel so personally. And you've been voices from the Northeast, so you've represented the Northeast writings nationally, internationally. And the first question which I would want to ask, sir, is how does one represent the heterogeneous identity of Northeast through the writings, via the writings of the land?
You want me to answer?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I don't think any of us, at least I can speak for Gonda and myself, that we consciously try to, talk about the Northeast. But I mentioned somewhere that, if you have experienced the Northeast, wherever you may be living later, we have many fictionists and poets, who may have lived in the Northeast and who have settled in cities now. You'll be forever tainted by the Northeast. So their writing would reflect, that I call it the pungent aroma of the Northeast. So we think about, fermented bamboo shoot in kinema and idol, So I have come to believe, at least with regard or concerning the English poetry from the Northeast, that maybe there is something called English poetry, Northeast poetry in English, something which would be very different, from I don't know if you again I'm talking as from the academic point of view. There's something called the Bombay School of Poetry. So we were talking about Ezekiel and others, who would represent or who started and pioneered that poetry. It was mostly metropolitan stuff. So, but the writing that emanates from the Northeast would be very different, and it has that distinct flavor, that pungent flavor that I was telling you about. But there, of course, there can no sweeping definitions. What is the Northeast? Where does it exist? And north of what or east of what? We don't really know. So to come back to your question, I don't think we've consciously tried to, represent the Northeast in our poetry. But our writing reflects perhaps the wishes and experiences of the people of the Northeast, and you just mentioned about the myths, the stories,
Yes,
and of course and history, but we would also like to include the politics and the terror,
right.
terrorism, so would give this body of writing some kind of distinct flavor.
Right, sir. Right, sir. So,
Yeah.
You answered one.
No, no, if you would like to.
Yes, sir. Please add.
Thank you, Laxmi. Robin. Just a few words that Robin Panks, I call Pankaj Sabha Panks, my other friends call him Pranks. We have been childhood friends, long time friends, so it's understandable that we talk well of each other, but we really like each other. I just want to tell you that. And thanks Panks for, thanks Panks, that rhymes. So, for telling good things about us.
You're a novelist.
Yeah, fiction writer, I lie all the time. Laxmi, actually this Northeast thing, I call Robin Robs, okay? So he robs many hearts. So whose hearts, don't ask me, it's not the right occasion. So Robs has spoken, this Northeast syndrome, I would say, in literature. It's basically most fiction writers, even poets, even I'm saying because poets have a wider locale. But fiction writing, which is the only thing I do in writing, I mean, I'm not a poet, I don't write non-fiction also. We need a locale, a geographical place where the authenticity is strengthened. We all novelists, all fiction writers, including science fiction writers, they go for the moon and Mars. So our moon and Mars is the Northeast. So necessarily because we write on our momos and chow and Darjeeling and about Shillong and Aizawl and Kohima and Guwahati, perforce because we want to give realism to it, authenticity, as much as any true blue, hopefully using the word true blue deliberately because I use the word, we ought to be worth our salt in writing. Hence that stamp has come in. But then there are writers, Laxmi, like Kaushik Borua, I can name one, or Siddharth Dev, who have been writing about Tibet, who have been writing about other places. So they write about, say, a situation in Bangalore or in New York. It has happened. There are many Assamese writers who have imaginatively written about New York or about based in Oslo, for example. So I found, this question has been so oft repeated, not because it has now become banal, but because it is very necessarily, relevant to our writings, Northeast literature. I think basically it's because of that locale, the geographical place, and the character's name. For example, Hazarika is basically essentially an Assamese name. When you say Tasi Chopel, my good friend, you don't get Chopels easily in Africa. You don't get Chopels in Kashmir. Maybe in Kashmir, yes, I'm not very sure. So Chopel necessarily means Sikkim. So in as much as that is there, apart from what Robs has already said about the cuisine and the smells and the hills and the rivers, and the ferns that are peculiar to the Northeast, all these do give us a stamp as Northeast writers. But Laxmi, again, now a lot of people, they are disgruntled with this. They want to be acknowledged as national writers or Indian writers or writers who have a universal appeal. So therein lies a crux, and about which I am not willing to elaborate because I am happy the way things are with me, Laxmi.
Yes,
Robs.
Ironically, I think the label has been foisted actually for us, but so you have now we have a Northeast festival. So everything, this thing has stuck. We have been. I don't want to talk like an academician, but we talk about colonization and internal colonization. Anyway, I don't want to go into that. I know very little about. I'm not conversant with postmodernist theory, but you talk about the center and the periphery, but what I'd like to say is the label has stuck, and I'm proud to wear it, as my badge now. So if they're going to identify us as Northeast writers, so be it. So yeah, I think that's how things stand.
yes, sir. And actually, Northeast writings have been labeled for being a discussion on political unrest and violence. That is how the Northeast has been labeled as, but there is more to that. And I think there are certain things common within the Northeastern writings too, sir. Common and apart from the politics and unrest, sir. So could you please highlight on that aspect, sir?
Okay. I have written a short piece. It's called Alternative Tradition of the Northeast, of poetry, Northeast poetry. But I am, as I must have mentioned earlier, I'm an academic misfit. I'm not, I don't have any critical, acumen. But it would be, I wish I had brought this, with me. You mentioned about myths, and I know at least 3 or 4 friends of mine, Mamang Thai being one, in terms of, and one of the best poets who write in English, who's been, who's not very visible. His name is Desmond Carmo Flang. So they talk about the mythic world in their poetry, and you'll not find this in the poetry written by poets elsewhere. I'm talking about poets who write in English. So the mythic world is, for these poets, the mythic world. A myth is, when we talk about the folk world or the mythic world, it's not something which happened in the past, but for these poets, it's their reality. It's something ongoing. So when Mamang Thai writes about the shaman, storyteller of her tribe, she's talking from first-hand experience. So she talks about these storytellers, in the hamlets, in the mountain villages, who would have this ritual kind of storytelling, and these stories are mostly have to do with creation myths and things like that. So the storytelling goes on for about 3 consecutive nights, and everyone from the village has to come and listen to the story. So and Desmond also talks about, I don't know if you've heard about were tigers, tiger man. This is something, a phenomenon, Southeast Asia also, and in the Northeast, these shamans who can turn into tigers. The spirit of the tiger, possesses them, and they turn into tigers. And they also double up as healers. The shamans, they're also the keeper of the stories, So a friend of mine, he has this wonderful word, a very arresting phrase, and it's called remembrancer, remembrancer of the tribe, So Desmond and Mamang especially, they talk about these shamans. But again, I noticed, this in their poetry. There's a term called mythopia, that is to create myths. Consciously create myths. So I've seen that with regard to Desmond and Mamang, they want to emulate the shaman, because they are also creating stories in their poems. So that's one aspect of Northeast poetry in English, which makes it distinctive. Then what is that? I think that I talked about something which. It's applicable to the poetry of Kanfam Singh Nongkundri, my friend Pankaj talked about. They have this term called Ethno Politics. Ethno Politics would be, I think, if I remember correctly, poetry which is not which is ethnic poetry. I mean, not nothing to do with the Anglo-Saxon poetic traditions. Actually, poetry of your own. And Kanfam has done it. If you read any of Kanfam's poetry, there's this wonderful use of wit and humor in his poetry. That makes his that sets him apart actually from many. My poetry is usually very gloomy, but. So he has learnt it from his own Khasi tradition called Pawar. basically, it's performative poetry, and it can happen anywhere, but it's mostly witty poetry, satire, and it can happen during funeral wake, or I don't know if you've heard about the tea thing in Shillong, archery, gambling, so power, so it's mostly improvisation. So Karpak has used that tradition. So that is ethno politics. You will not find this in the amongst the Mumbai poets.
Yes,
Yeah,
it's unique.
yeah, it's unique. Then another thing is we have not been culturally uprooted. There is a word called deracination. Again, I'm using a literary or it's a cultural term. Deracinated. We have not been deracinated. Because most of these metropolitan poets, they have lost their cultural, moving. So what is that expression? So they borrow freely from different cultures all over the world. Like Ezra Pound and T.S. Eliot. But we are still very connected to our own culture, our own languages. So we have not been deracinated. So again, that makes us different. There is a word called deracination. Again, I'm using a literary or it's a cultural term. Deracinated. We have not been deracinated. Because most of these metropolitan poets, they have lost their cultural, moving. So what is that expression? So they borrow freely from different cultures all over the world. Like Ezra Pound and T.S. Eliot. But we are still very connected to our own culture, our own languages. So we have not been deracinated. So again, that makes us different. What is that term? Anyway, that's yeah. That's sort of, yeah.
Dhurba sir,
Yeah.
add. Yes, sir, add on to
The basic question was? The basic question was, Laxmi?
Yes, sir. I said that Northeast is known and labelled as being an area of political unrest
Oh,
and violence.
Yeah, I got it. I was actually sipping that water. See, Laxmi, like this, there are stories not necessarily related to violence and all the time. There have been great poems and great stories written on love, for example.
Yes, sir.
Well, I'll not quote so many because I have gone through a lot of Northeast literature dealing with love and such between two humans. But there's also great love for the rivers, the trees and the mountains. It's evident in Robbins' poems, in Kid Farms, like he has already said. And there is an ethereal feeling, in these poems, which are not easily found in the other urban poems that you come across.
Right.
So he's talking about the Bombay school. I know about the South, the school from South India or from Delhi. There is the ruggedness that we have is a poem by itself, but the ruggedness that they carry may not be very poetic, if at all I can convey it that way. So what happens in the Northeast, again, I hope you'll please give me due allowance for quoting. I written a collection, my first collection of short stories is called Luck. It's based entirely on animals and birds. Except for one story tale called The Gun Runner of Jorabat, it's to do with violence, about a gun runner. But the other 9 stories are all to do with animals. So when I sent it to my publisher, long years back, that was in 2010, he says, Dhruva, but you are supposed to be doing law and order duty. How is it that you were writing stories on a dog and a goat and things like that? I said, I don't know. But the Northeast has more beautiful animals than you can think of. More beautiful birds. For example, Assam has 625 different varieties of birds. That may be an ornithologist's idea about numbers. But I think the story behind every chicken, I written a book, a story called Chicken Fever, about a magistrate who is so scared that he goes through that kind of a fever, and his friend says, you're a chicken. He said, But then I thought I would evolve it into a story based on that rooster, that chicken, that mother hen actually. So Laxmi, what I'm trying to tell you is not just about violence that the Northeast is famous for. If you go to some of the Karbi literature in Assam, or the literature of the Boros, the major tribal groups, they have a lot of these stories that belong to the non-violent category. And I'll not go into each and every one, and it will be more or less a boring exercise, but in general, that's how it is.
Do you have bowstring winter?
Bowstring.
Yeah.
Nikha, do you have bowstring?
Okay, I would like, Donda to read a little excerpt from, his description of winter in Shillong, So I think again, he hinted at that, perhaps that kind of passion maybe, Jayanta Mahaprabhu talked about, that he calls it, that phrase again, he used a thinness of feeling in the poetry written by these metropolitan poets. But I think perhaps, again,
That's it.
Yeah.
That's it. The thinness of
feeling.
feelings.
Thinness
That's
of
what
feelings.
Jayanta Mahaprabhu once said.
Yeah.
I remember.
And what perhaps make our poetry or stories different is that if I can use another borrowed phrase, there's a lot of heart in our art. So and I'm sure all of us wear our hearts on our sleeves. I mean, our writing hearts on our sleeves also. But this thing, you talked about violence and politics in perhaps. I mean, that's what we have been accused of.
Yes, accused, right.
It's Northeast is the place where trouble is always brewing.
Mm-hmm.
And of course we have to write about it because it's something that you cannot shut your eyes or close your ears to.
Mm-hmm.
That's what happened to me. So, but it's for writers. Writer is always in conflict with himself. What did Yeats say? Out of the quarrel with oneself, one writes poetry. I don't remember the exact line. Something to that effect. And so that conflict, for writers from the Northeast can exist perhaps at 3 or 2 levels. So first, the obvious, of course, you talk about the center and the periphery. Okay, that's obvious. I mean, that's superfluous. But for a writer, the second conflict, I mean, it becomes a little deeper. Is the conflict between you and your own people. That has happened with me. Their politics, their culture, whatever. And lastly, the conflict between the writer and himself. Yeah. So when you talk about politics, and Donda and I, we have experienced this. These insurgencies or insurgent movements, and of course they have all lapse into terrorism. I call them terrorists, because they all have innocent blood on their hands. So, but we've always been asked to speak hands with them. These nationalist movements. We've almost been coerced into participating or being part of the nationalist movement. I think Ufa asked you to do something for them.
Yeah.
I've been asked to write a press release by the PLA, that kind of thing. So, but for the writer, it's a little more difficult and tricky also, because when I write about it in my poems, for example, it will never be. I may believe. I mean, especially when I was younger, maybe I believe in the nationalist cause. That we suffer from our identity crisis. We want to be different from the rest of the country, the mainland. But later, this conflict with my people, translates into some kind of a conflict with how do I put it? Put it shortly. It's not unquestioning nationalism anymore, and there is some kind of that kind of politics, that kind of violence, there is some kind of a nervous internalization of those things in my poetry. Yeah. So, but as I mentioned earlier, the writer is also always in conflict with himself or herself. So I may be saying something tomorrow. As I said, we're artful dodgers, So I may be saying something today, So I might think, my views may change tomorrow. Yeah. Sorry. So anyway, but I would. Okay. Yeah. I want to listen to Dhurba reading, talking about the Ceylon. But anyway, never mind.
That takes us to the next question. So, ethno politics, the word you said, sir, and I think Dhruva sir told us about the ruggedness has its own beauty. So how difficult it is, or is it challenging to explain those aspects to the mainlanders, like writings from the margins to the mainlanders? Has it been challenging, or is it like literature has no barriers?
We don't know them.
Yeah, I think as one of my friends said, you don't need a okay, it's become banal, you don't need a certificate from them. But I don't know, and it's happening. Dhurba and I were talking about it all the time. Now it's become a bit of a fashion to do, say, even while writing stories, to do a lot of research.
Yeah.
The context becomes more important than the text. But we are very old-fashioned, if a story doesn't have, if a novel or a short story doesn't have the story,
Thematic story.
yeah, the story, what Foster said about the fundamental aspect of a novel is it's a story. So if the story is not there, then it's not for me. You got to tell this good story. Forget about your wizardry with words and your accomplishments. Regard to style and other things. But if you can't tell a good story, then it's not for me. So. Sorry, I missed your question.
No, it's okay, sir.
Yeah.
It's fine.
Yeah. But of course, let it be fictional poetry, they come in all shapes and sizes. So you have, although neat compartmentalization doesn't work, but I don't think about poetry along these lines. Poetry of the head and poetry of the heart. Of course, you can have a combination of both. But my poetry would tilt more towards the poetry of the heart, and so I don't depend on wordplay and an array of images. I don't depend on that. I have to tell. I also usually tell stories in my poems, and they are mostly autobiographical. We were just, Pankaj and I and Dhurba, we're talking about plundering our own lives for subject matter. Yeah.
So would like
Yeah.
to add.
The ruggedness. How come there is less? How come there is poetry in the kind of rugged, the rugged themes that we deal in the Northeast? How is it there, and how does it differ from the rest? Number one, Laxmi, we don't owe anything to the mainland readers or writers. We are on our own. If not our pedestal, our ground is on the feet. The ground is beneath our feet is ours. It belongs to nobody else. And there is something very funny. I think I'm psychologically disturbed because I keep on talking about where is our friend gone? He's not here. Ricky, hi. So I keep on talking about his honesty. Please tell me later on what's wrong with me. Okay, he's a psychologist.
We can set a appointment, sir.
Okay, done. I'll pay you fees in installments. Okay.
Don't be on the couch.
Yeah. But then this word honesty. It's such a loaded word. It has so many configurations, and we make it suitable to our own convenience. But at the heart of it, you have to be dead honest with your writings, whether it's fiction, whether it's facts, whether it's poetry. You cannot, to use a very brutally, usable words nowadays, karma, sharing. You can't bullshit yourself. And that is what, they talk about fake news. If you fake yourself, you cannot be I've not been a poet as such, but I love poetry.
I'll just add something. If
Yeah,
you remember
please.
something that we both love, what Camus said, the refusal to tell lies
Yes.
about one knows. Something
Yes,
to that.
yes. We have I'm a sheer admirer of Albert Camus, and so is Rob's. And you must be honest. And how do you define honesty? We define honesty in terms of what society has told us, but you define it to yourself when you write. And the only place where you can be dead honest is while praying to God and while writing. So if your writing is not a prayer, you better not write. Whatever it is. I'm not much into such a historical fiction, although I have read Alexander Dumas and I read William Dalrymple, just to quote two characters. It has its own finery. But when you write from your own experience, your memory and your reading, and you work out your own craftsmanship, which doesn't obey as such any laws, although there are laws of fiction writing, there are certain laws of poetry also. You can't have a blank page and say, this is a poetry on blank poetry. And there's just this page there, and you look at it and say, oh my God, yeah, Robs has written a poetry on blank poetry and it has no lines whatsoever, no title. You can't have that.
It's not as an art.
Yeah. So there are rules there, and we may not obey the rules. In as much as in fiction also, there are so many of them I've come across now after I retired. I've read some of these, what we call once upon a time, unreadable books, because they were famous because they were not readable. Like James Joyce's Ulysses. Nobody reads James Joyce. But I read it simply because it was not read. Now we come here, what Laxmi has said, how much of poetry is there in this rugged literature sharing of the Northeast? I would say tremendous. There is a sensibility here, a poetic urge here. In any of her works, the kind of language we use, and the funny thing is this, when you compare our literature with any of the other literature that comes out from the rest of India, you'll find that there is a sing-song quality to our fiction, to our poetry. That musical quality, that sing-song, what we call the cadence, and what Somerset Maugham once called euphony, that beauty to the ear, but through the mind, not through just music, through the notes that you get in a guitar or in a piano, but through the placement of the 5 vowels, through the prepositions, through the conjunctions. It's at such a place, or in such a sentence, in such a way, that there is a sing-song quality to it without any formal rhyme to it. And this is slightly, I'm probably talking entirely about myself, in the sense that when I see a sentence, I was reading yesterday one of our friends' poems, it had that cadence, the rhythm, but it didn't have that typical that rhythmic structure, that metered structure that you come across in traditional poetry or in the Bombay Wallas or in the Delhi Wallas or the ones from South India. I'm not demeaning them because they have their own style, and to that extent we have our own style. I think Saita was talking about style and content and form a while back, which is very academic. But me being more or less a self-learner, Saita, you are a chemist, I'm an economist academically. So we find, for example, I love this style where you can, this is what I'm not doing right now, you can see a lot with a minimum of words in writing. The brevity is the soul of wit, they say, but brevity is also beautiful if you can do it with the kind of rhythm that the Northeast is famous for. anyway, I think I'm slightly getting carried away, Laxmi, that this water was very lovely to,